The fine arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, tucked between a furniture catalog and my electric bill, as if it were just another piece of mundane correspondence instead of a $300 gut punch. I stared at the letter from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, my coffee growing cold in my hand, reading the words over and over like they might rearrange themselves into something that made actual sense. Violation of Article 7, Section 4, Subsection C regarding excessive smoke emissions from residential chimneys. Fine amount, $300. Payment due within 30 days. I had moved to Whispering Pines, Oregon, just 6 months earlier, trading my cramped apartment in Portland for a modest 2-bedroom house with a yard and a mountain view. The place came with a wood stove, which the previous owner had bragged about during the showing. It was a beautiful unit, a modern Lopi model with a glass door, and I had been using it regularly since October when the temperatures started dropping. I loved the ritual of it, the way the flames danced behind the glass, the dry heat that filled the living room, but excessive smoke. I walked outside and looked up at my chimney. Nothing. Just cold morning air and the faint smell of pine from the surrounding trees. I called the number on the letterhead immediately. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Whispering Pines HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. My name is Samuel Quinn. I just received a fine in the mail about excessive chimney smoke, and I think there has been some mistake. One moment, please, I heard typing. Yes, Mr. Quinn, 447 Elderwood Drive. The violation was reported by our board president, Mrs. Patricia Hendrickson. She documented excessive smoke emissions from your property on multiple occasions throughout the past month. But I have a modern wood stove. It is EPA-certified. There should not be excessive smoke. I am just relaying the information, Mr. Quinn. If you wish to dispute the fine, you will need to appear before the board at our next monthly meeting. That is scheduled for next Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community center. I will be there, I said. The following days crawled by with agonizing slowness. I researched everything I could about wood stoves, EPA standards, and HOA smoke regulations. My stove was a 2022 model, well within the EPA's Phase 2 requirements that mandated particulate emissions of no more than 2.5 grams per hour. I had the original documentation, the installation records from a certified technician, everything. I also started paying closer attention to my chimney when I used the stove. The smoke was minimal, exactly what you would expect from a properly functioning EPA-certified appliance. Most of what came out was just heat distortion and water vapor. I took pictures and videos on my phone, time stamped and dated. Thursday evening arrived wrapped in cold drizzle. I drove to the Whispering Pines Community Center, a low brick building near the neighborhood entrance, clutching a folder full of documentation. The parking lot held maybe a dozen cars. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a handful of residents sat scattered across folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members sat. The woman in the center was unmistakable. Patricia Hendrickson looked exactly like her name suggested. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, a pearl necklace, and an expression that suggested she had just discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. She wore a navy blazer and had a gavel resting near her right hand. "Let us call this meeting to order," Patricia said, rapping the gavel twice. She went through the standard opening business. Minutes from the last meeting, financial reports, a discussion about holiday decorations that apparently some residents were already putting up even though it was only early November. Finally, she said, "New business. We have Samuel Quinn here to dispute a fine for excessive chimney smoke. Mr. Quinn, You may approach and state your case." I stood and walked to the front, feeling like I was in some bizarre courtroom. "Thank you." I received a fine for $300 regarding excessive smoke from my chimney. I want to show you the documentation for my wood stove. It is EPA Phase 2 certified and professionally installed. The emissions should be well within legal limits. I handed Patricia my folder. She barely glanced at it before passing it to the board member on her left, a tired-looking man in his 60s who actually took the time to flip through the pages. "Mr. Quinn," Patricia said, "the EPA standards are federal guidelines. Our HOA has additional restrictions to maintain the aesthetic quality and air standards of our community. Excessive visible smoke is a nuisance, regardless of whether it meets federal emission standards." "But there is not excessive visible smoke," I said. "I have been monitoring it. I have photos and videos showing minimal smoke output, which is normal for any wood-burning appliance. I have personally witnessed dark smoke pouring from your chimney on multiple occasions," Patricia said. "On November 2nd, November 7th, November 10th, and November 14th. Each time the smoke was clearly excessive and lasted for extended periods." I pulled out my phone. "I have videos from those exact dates showing minimal smoke. Would you like to see them?" "That will not be necessary," Patricia said. "I trust my own observations." "With all due respect," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I think there might be some confusion about what constitutes excessive smoke. Modern wood stoves produce very little visible smoke once they are burning properly. What you might be seeing is just water vapor and heat distortion." "I know what smoke looks like, Mr. Quinn." The board member who had been reading my documents spoke up. His nameplate read George Whitmore, Vice President. "Patricia, this documentation does seem pretty thorough. If his stove meets EPA standards and was professionally installed, maybe we should get an official inspection before enforcing the fine. George, we have discussed this neighborhood smoke problem at length. We have a responsibility to all residents to maintain air quality. I have personally received complaints from 3 other homeowners about Mr. Quinn's smoke. I would like to know who made those complaints," I said. "That information is confidential," Patricia replied. "How can I address complaints if I do not know the specifics?" "The specifics are that you are producing excessive smoke. The solution is to either stop using your wood stove or pay the fines when they are assessed." My hands clenched around my phone. "So you want me to just not use a legitimate heating appliance in my own home? I want you to be a considerate neighbor and follow community standards." George leaned forward. "Patricia, I really think we should at least allow him to get an independent inspection. If an official inspector says there is a problem, then we have grounds for the fine. If not, maybe we need to reconsider our position." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she looked around at the other board members. 2 of them nodded slightly. She clearly was not happy about it. "Fine," she said. "Mr. Quinn, you have 30 days to provide an official inspection report from a certified chimney inspector or EPA compliance officer. If the report shows no violations, we will waive the fine. If it shows any issues, the fine stands and we will assess additional fines for future violations." "That is fair," I said. "Thank you." As I left the community center, George caught up with me in the parking lot. "Hey, Samuel, right?" "Yeah, thanks for backing me up in there." He shrugged, rain dripping off his jacket. "Patricia means well, but she can be overzealous. Between you and me, I think she has been looking for reasons to ban wood stoves entirely. She has allergies or something, claims smoke bothers her even though half the neighborhood has fireplaces and wood stoves. So this is personal. I would not say personal exactly, just she has an agenda. Get that inspection, make sure everything is documented. Cover your bases. I drove home frustrated but feeling like I had at least bought myself some time. The next morning, I started calling inspectors. The first two were booked out for weeks. The third, a guy named Ron Castellano from Portland Chimney and Stove Inspections, could come out the following Tuesday. "What exactly are you looking for?" Ron asked on the phone. "I need documentation that my wood stove meets EPA standards and is not producing excessive emissions. My HOA fined me and I need proof that there is no violation." "Okay, I can do a full inspection and emissions test. It will run you about $350. More than the fine itself, but I needed this settled." "That is fine. I will see you Tuesday." Ron arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, driving a white van with his company logo on the side. He was a stocky guy in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and the easy confidence of someone who knew his trade inside and out. "Nice stove," he said immediately when he saw my Lopi. "These are good units." "You have the model that came out in 2022, right?" "Yes, exactly. Should not be having any issues with this." "When was it installed?" "Previous owner had it put in about 3 years ago. I have the installation records." Ron spent the next 2 hours going over everything. He inspected the stove itself, checked the chimney with a camera, measured the flue draft, and ran an emissions test while I burned a load of wood. He took notes on a tablet, occasionally grunting or nodding to himself. Finally, he sat down at my kitchen table and pulled up his findings. "Okay, so here is the deal. Your stove is in excellent condition. The installation is textbook perfect, good clearances, proper venting, everything. I ran the emissions test 3 times to be thorough. Your particulate matter emissions are averaging 1.8 grams per hour. The EPA limit is 2.5, so you are well under. Your chimney draft is good, no blockages, no creosote buildup. Honestly, this is one of the cleaner burning setups I have seen in a while." Relief flooded through me. "So there is nothing wrong, nothing at all. You are burning seasoned wood, right?" "Yes, I bought a cord of oak and madrone, all kiln dried." "That is what I figured. If you were burning wet wood or trash or something, I would see it in the emissions. But this is clean. I will write up a full report for you. Are you looking for anything specific to address the HOA complaint?" "Just documentation that everything is legal and not excessive." "You got it. I will include my findings, photographs, the emissions data, and a statement that your setup meets and exceeds all local, state, and federal requirements. Should be ready by tomorrow. I will email it and send a hard copy by mail." Ron was true to his word. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a comprehensive 12-page report with data, photographs, and a clear conclusion that my wood stove was operating properly and posed no environmental or safety concerns. I made 3 copies and sent one to the HOA office via certified mail. I thought that would be the end of it. On Friday, I came home from work to find another letter from the HOA. This time it was not a fine, but a formal notice that I was required to appear before a special session of the board to discuss ongoing smoke violations. I called Brenda at the office immediately. "I just sent you a full inspection report showing there are no violations." "Why am I being called to another meeting?" "I am sorry, Mr. Quinn, but Mrs. Hendrickson has documented additional smoke violations since your last appearance. The special session is scheduled for Monday evening." "This is insane. The inspector just verified everything is fine." "You will have to discuss that with the board, sir." Monday evening was colder, the first real taste of winter pushing down from the mountains. I showed up at the community center with my inspection report, my documentation, and a growing sense that this was about more than just chimney smoke. This time, the room was fuller. Maybe 20 residents scattered across the chairs. Patricia sat at the center table again, flanked by George and the other board members. But there were also 3 other people I did not recognize sitting in the front row, looking official and uncomfortable. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately addressed me. "Mr. Quinn, thank you for attending. We have reviewed the inspection report you provided. While we appreciate the documentation, we have continued to observe excessive smoke from your property. In fact, since our last meeting, the violations have increased in frequency and severity." "That is not possible," I said. "I have been using the stove exactly as I was before, and the inspector confirmed everything is operating correctly. I have photographs." Patricia produced a folder and pulled out several printed pictures. She held them up for the room to see. They showed a house, my house, with thick, dark smoke pouring from the chimney. The smoke was actually excessive, dark and billowing, nothing like what my stove produced. "When were these taken?" I asked. "Over this past weekend, Saturday and Sunday." "I was not home this weekend. I was in Seattle visiting my brother. I did not use the stove at all." Patricia's expression did not change. "Are you suggesting I fabricated these photographs?" "I am saying they could not have been taken when you say they were. I was out of town. My stove was not in use," George spoke up. "Patricia, do the photos have timestamps?" She hesitated for just a second. "The metadata shows they were taken this past Saturday and Sunday." "But that is impossible if Samuel was not home." One of the residents in the front row, a woman in her 30s wearing business casual, stood up. "Excuse me. I am Michelle Torres. I live 2 doors down from Mr. Quinn on Elderwood Drive. I saw Samuel leave Friday afternoon with an overnight bag. His car was gone all weekend. I did not see any smoke from his chimney on Saturday or Sunday." Another resident stood, an older man. "Frank Morrison, 451 Elderwood Drive, right next door to Mr. Quinn. I was home all weekend. I did not notice any unusual smoke from his property." Patricia's face was reddening. "Are you all suggesting I am lying?" "I am suggesting maybe you are mistaken," George said carefully. "Or maybe the photos are not of Samuel's house. I know which house is his. I have been monitoring it specifically because of the violations." The word monitoring sent a chill through me. "You have been watching my house." "I have been documenting violations as part of my duties as board president." "That is creepy," Michelle Torres said. Several people murmured agreement. George cleared his throat. "Patricia, I think we need to table this until we can verify the photographs. Samuel, can you provide proof you were out of town?" "I have gas receipts from the drive, restaurant receipts from Seattle, text messages with my brother." I pulled out my phone. "I can show you right now. That would be helpful." I showed George my phone, pulling up the receipts and messages. His expression grew more troubled as he scrolled through them. "This does corroborate that you were in Seattle over the weekend." He looked at Patricia. "I think we need to dismiss this complaint. The inspection report shows no violations. Samuel was not even home when these alleged new violations occurred, and we have neighbors saying they did not observe any smoke. I move to waive the original fine and dismiss any further complaints unless we have more concrete evidence." "Second," said one of the other board members, a woman named Carol. Patricia looked like she had swallowed something bitter. "Fine. The fine is waived. But I will continue to monitor the situation." "Maybe monitor from a less invasive distance," George suggested. "We do not want any harassment complaints." I left the meeting feeling vindicated but deeply unsettled. Patricia Hendrickson was not just overzealous. She was willing to lie and fabricate evidence to push her agenda. That was a different kind of problem. Over the next week, I kept using my wood stove but started documenting everything obsessively. I set up a cheap security camera pointed at my chimney, recording 24 hours a day. I kept logs of when I burned fires, what wood I used, outdoor temperature conditions. It felt ridiculous, but I wanted to be prepared. 2 weeks passed quietly. Then, on a Wednesday evening in early December, I was just sitting down to dinner when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a uniformed code enforcement officer from Jackson County. Samuel Quinn. Yes, I am Officer Bradley with County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about illegal burning at this address. I need to inspect your wood stove and chimney. Of course. Come in. But I already had an inspection that showed everything was fine. I understand, but we have to follow up on all complaints. It will just take a few minutes. Officer Bradley was professional and efficient. He looked at my stove, asked about my wood source, checked my installation records. After about 20 minutes, he nodded. Everything looks good here, Mr. Quinn. Your stove meets all requirements. I will file a report saying no violations were found. Can I ask who filed the complaint? It was anonymous, called into our hotline. But between you and me, we have been getting a lot of complaints from this neighborhood lately. All anonymous, all about wood smoke. Most of them turn out to be nothing. After he left, I called George Whitmore. He answered on the second ring. Hey Samuel, what is going on? I just had a county code enforcement officer at my door investigating an anonymous complaint about my wood stove. He found nothing wrong, but he mentioned getting lots of similar complaints from this neighborhood. You know anything about that? George sighed heavily. Yeah, I have been hearing things. Patricia has been on this crusade about wood smoke. I think she has been calling in complaints herself, trying to get county involvement since the HOA inspection did not go her way. Several other residents with wood stoves or fireplaces have been getting visits too. That is harassment. I agree, but proving it is harder. The complaints are anonymous. What can I do? Document everything. If it escalates, you might need to consult a lawyer. And Samuel, be careful. Patricia does not like to lose. She has been board president for 6 years and is used to getting her way. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the situation had entered new territory. This was not just about HOA overreach anymore. This was targeted harassment, and I needed to take it seriously. The next day, I contacted a lawyer, a woman named Lisa Brennan who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her office was in Medford, about 20 minutes away. I drove out Friday morning and spent an hour explaining the entire situation. Lisa listened carefully, taking notes on a legal pad. So let me make sure I understand. You received a fine that was later waived after an independent inspection showed no violations. Then, the HOA president claimed you were violating again when you were provably out of town. And now, you are getting anonymous code enforcement complaints that also turn up nothing. That is exactly right. And you think the HOA president is behind the anonymous complaints. The county officer said they have been getting multiple complaints from this neighborhood, and the timing lines up with Patricia's campaign against wood smoke. Lisa tapped her pen on the pad. Okay. What you are describing could constitute harassment and possibly abuse of process if she is filing false reports with county authorities. The problem is proving it. Anonymous complaints are hard to trace back to a specific person. So what do I do? Keep documenting everything like you have been. The security camera is good. Keep logs of your stove usage. If she approaches you directly or sends more formal complaints through the HOA, save everything. If you get more code enforcement visits, get copies of the complaint reports through public records requests. We might be able to establish a pattern that points to her. What about the HOA itself? Can they keep harassing me like this? Oregon law gives HOAs pretty broad authority, but they have to follow their own rules and they cannot selectively enforce regulations. If they are targeting you specifically while ignoring other residents who use wood stoves, that could be discriminatory enforcement. Do you know if other people are being targeted? George mentioned some others are getting code enforcement visits. That actually makes it harder to prove you are being singled out. But if the complaints are baseless and repeatedly found to have no merit, there is a case for harassment. The bar is just pretty high to prove it legally. I left her office having paid a $300 consultation fee and feeling no more secure than before. The system seemed designed to favor the HOA, or at least to make fighting them expensive and exhausting. December settled in with cold rains and occasional snow. I used my wood stove regularly because that was what it was there for, and I was not going to let Patricia Hendrickson bully me out of heating my own home. But every time I lit a fire, I felt anxious, waiting for the next complaint or visit. Christmas decorations went up around the neighborhood. I put up simple lights on my front porch, nothing elaborate, sticking carefully to the HOA's holiday decoration guidelines. I was not giving Patricia any ammunition. Then, 2 days before Christmas, I received a certified letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from the Jackson County District Attorney's office. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Mr. Quinn, this office has received multiple reports of illegal burning at your residence located at 447 Elderwood Drive. While initial inspections have not revealed violations, the frequency of complaints warrants further investigation. You are hereby notified that you may be subject to additional inspections, and that continued illegal burning activity could result in criminal charges under Oregon Revised Statutes Section 468A. Please contact this office to discuss these concerns. Criminal charges. For using my legal, inspected, EPA-certified wood stove. I called Lisa Brennan immediately. She was away for the holidays but called me back that evening. This is escalating, she said after I read her the letter. Sending a letter like that based on repeatedly unfounded complaints is unusual. Someone is really pushing this. What do I do? Contact the DA's office after the holidays. Be cooperative but firm. Bring all your documentation. The inspection report, your usage logs, everything. Show them this is a baseless harassment campaign. I will come with you if you want. Yes, please. In the meantime, do not use your stove. I know that is frustrating, but if there is any chance of criminal charges, we need to eliminate any possible basis for them, even a bogus one. So I spent Christmas freezing in my own house, running the electric heat and watching my power bill climb, angry and frustrated and feeling helpless. The day after Christmas, something changed. I was checking my security camera footage, just routine review, when I noticed something odd in the nighttime recordings from 3 nights earlier. Around 2 a.m., a car had pulled up across the street from my house. Someone got out, stood there for several minutes looking at my house, then got back in and drove away. I could not make out the person clearly, but the car was visible under the streetlight. A silver Honda Accord. I zoomed in on the license plate. I could not quite read it, but I got a partial. I checked other nights. The same car appeared multiple times over the past 2 weeks, always late at night, always parking briefly across from my house. I saved all the footage and sent it to Lisa with a detailed email. She responded quickly. This is good. If we can identify who owns that car and connect them to the complaints, we might have something actionable. Can you get a better shot of the plate? I spent hours going through footage, finding the clearest frames, enhancing them as best I could with free software. Finally, I got a readable plate number, HGF 7392. I did not know what to do with it. Running plates was not something civilians could just do. I thought about contacting the police, but for what? Someone parking on a public street was not illegal, even if it was creepy. Then I thought of Frank Morrison, my next-door neighbor who had spoken up at the HOA meeting. I had chatted with him a few times since then, and he had mentioned he was a retired cop from Medford. I knocked on his door that evening. Frank answered wearing a Gonzaga sweatshirt and holding a beer. "Hey Samuel, what is up, Frank? I need some advice. You have a minute?" "Sure, come on in." I showed him the security footage and explained the situation, including the letter from the DA's office. Frank's expression grew more serious as I talked. "This is messed up," he said. "I retired from the force 5 years ago, but I still have some contacts. Let me see what I can do about that plate number. Might take a day or two. I appreciate it. I just need to know who is watching my house." Frank called me 2 days later. "You got a pen?" "The car is registered to Patricia Hendrickson, 523 Meadowbrook Lane." I felt vindicated and furious at the same time. So it is her. She has been staking out my house. "Looks like it. That is stalking behavior, Samuel. You could file a police report." "Would they do anything?" "Hard to say. She could claim she was just driving around the neighborhood. But combined with everything else, you are building a pattern of harassment. I would document it and tell your lawyer. If it continues, definitely file a report." I met with Lisa Brennan and an assistant district attorney named Marcus Chen in early January. The meeting was at the county offices in Medford, a generic conference room with a long table and harsh fluorescent lighting. I brought everything: the inspection report, my usage logs, the security footage, copies of all the HOA complaints, the code enforcement visit reports I had obtained through public records requests, and the documentation about Patricia's car. Marcus Chen was a young guy, probably early 30s, wearing a dark suit and looking tired. He reviewed my materials while Lisa sat beside me, professional and calm. "Mr. Quinn," Marcus finally said, "I am going to be straight with you. The letter you received was sent at the urging of someone who has been very persistent in contacting our office about smoke violations in your neighborhood. We sent it to cover our bases, but I have reviewed the code enforcement reports, and I do not see any basis for charges against you. So I am not in trouble. No, your stove is legal, it has been inspected and passed, and multiple code enforcement visits have found no violations. I am honestly not sure why this has been pursued so aggressively." "I can tell you why," I said. "The HOA board president has been harassing me because she wants to ban wood stoves. She is the one who has been filing the complaints." "Can you prove that?" Lisa spoke up. "The complaints are officially anonymous, but the pattern is clear. Mrs. Hendrickson has been documented surveilling Mr. Quinn's property late at night. She has lied about violations at HOA meetings, and the timing of the complaints matches her campaign against wood burning." Marcus frowned. "Surveilling his property?" I showed him the security footage. He watched it several times. "This is concerning," he said. "If someone is filing false reports and stalking you, that is a different matter. Have you filed a police report?" "Not yet." "I think you should. This goes beyond an HOA dispute. Filing false reports to law enforcement or government agencies is a crime. If we can establish that Mrs. Hendrickson has been making knowingly false complaints, she could face charges for abuse of process or even making false reports to authorities. What would I need to prove that? A clear connection between her and the anonymous complaints, and evidence that she knew the complaints were baseless. The stalking behavior helps establish the first part. For the second part, you would need to show she had been informed multiple times that no violations existed, but continued filing complaints anyway. Lisa pulled out her folder. We have documentation that Mr. Quinn provided a comprehensive inspection report to the HOA board showing no violations. We have records of board meetings where Mrs. Hendrickson was told there were no violations, and we have records of at least 6 subsequent code enforcement complaints after that point. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, here is what I recommend. Mr. Quinn, file a police report about the stalking and harassment. Include all this documentation. If the police investigation can connect Mrs. Hendrickson to the anonymous complaints, which should be possible through phone records or other means if they subpoena them, then we could potentially bring charges. At minimum, it would put her on notice that this behavior has legal consequences. I filed the police report that afternoon at the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who took my report was professional but non-committal about what would happen next. We will investigate and follow up with you, she said. Keep documenting any contact or incidents. I heard nothing for 2 weeks. Then, on a Wednesday evening in late January, 2 detectives showed up at my door. Mr. Quinn, I am Detective Sarah Rawlings. This is Detective Tom Foster. We are following up on your report about harassment and stalking. Do you have time to talk? Yes, of course. Come in. They sat in my living room and Detective Rawlings took the lead. We have been investigating your complaint. We obtained phone records for the code enforcement hotline and were able to trace several of the anonymous complaints about your property. They all came from the same cell phone number, registered to Patricia Hendrickson. My heart was pounding. So she has been making false reports. That is what it looks like. We also pulled code enforcement records and compared them to the HOA meeting minutes you provided. Mrs. Hendrickson was present when you presented documentation that your wood stove met all legal requirements. She continued to file complaints after that. We have enough to pursue charges for making false reports and potentially stalking. What happens now? We will be arresting Mrs. Hendrickson and charging her with 3 counts of making false reports to authorities and 1 count of stalking. The DA's office is also looking at charges related to abuse of her HOA position. This is pretty clear-cut. Will there be a trial? That depends on whether she takes a plea deal. But you will probably be called as a witness either way. Also, you should be aware that this will likely create some tension in your neighborhood. It already has. Detective Foster spoke for the first time. For what it is worth, we have talked to several other residents while investigating. You are not the only one she has targeted. We have at least 3 other homeowners with similar complaints about harassment over wood stoves and other issues. Her behavior has been escalating over time. They left shortly after, telling me someone would be in touch. I sat in my living room feeling a weird mix of relief and anxiety. I had wanted validation, proof that I was not crazy, that Patricia really had been harassing me. Now I had it. But what came next? The arrest happened 2 days later. I only knew about it because George Whitmore called me that evening. Samuel, I do not know if you have heard, but Patricia was arrested this afternoon. The sheriff's department came to her house. It is all over the neighborhood. I know. I am the one who filed the police report. Silence on the other end. Then, good. I mean, I am sorry it came to this, but good. She has been out of control. The board is meeting tomorrow night for an emergency session. We need to elect an interim president and figure out how to move forward. Would you be willing to come and explain what happened? I think people deserve to know. Yeah, I can do that. The emergency board meeting was packed. At least 40 residents showed up, filling every chair in the community center and standing along the walls. There was an electric tension in the room, everyone whispering and speculating. George called the meeting to order, and explained that Patricia had been arrested on charges related to harassment and making false reports. Then he invited me to explain the situation. I stood up and told the whole story, from the initial fine to the inspection to the stalking to the false police reports. I kept it factual, not editorializing, just laying out what had happened. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then a woman in the back stood up. I recognized her from around the neighborhood but did not know her name. "I want to thank you for speaking up," she said. "Patricia fined me 6 times last year for different violations, half of which were completely made up. I was too intimidated to fight her. I am glad someone finally did." Another resident stood. "Same here. She threatened to put a lien on my house over landscaping violations that were not in the HOA rules. I ended up spending $3,000 on new plants just to get her off my back." More stories came out. Patricia had been using her position as HOA president to bully and harass residents for years, imposing arbitrary rules, inflating fines, and retaliating against anyone who questioned her. The wood stove campaign was just her latest crusade. George looked shell-shocked. "I had no idea it was this widespread. I knew she could be difficult, but I did not realize she was systematically abusing her position." "You never questioned it," someone called out. "You just went along with whatever she wanted." "You are right," George said quietly. "I should have been more attentive. I should have stood up to her sooner. That is on me, and I apologize." The meeting went late into the night. By the end, the board had voted to implement new oversight procedures, term limits for board positions, and a formal complaint process for residents to report board misconduct. It was not perfect, but it was something. As people filed out, several residents came up to thank me or share their own Patricia stories. Michelle Torres, the neighbor who had spoken up at the earlier meeting, gave me a hug. "You did the right thing," she said. "This neighborhood needed someone to stand up to her." The criminal case moved slowly. Patricia hired an expensive lawyer who tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that the complaints were made in good faith as part of her HOA duties. The DA's office pushed back hard, pointing to the inspection reports and documentation that proved she knew the complaints were baseless. In March, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 2 counts of making false reports, a misdemeanor, and 1 count of stalking. The abuse of position charges were dropped as part of the deal. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, a $2,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and a restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of my property. She also had to resign from the HOA board and was prohibited from holding any HOA position for 5 years. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked smaller somehow, diminished, sitting at the defendant's table in a gray pantsuit. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and read a prepared statement. "I want to apologize to Mr. Quinn and to the Whispering Pines community. I allowed my concerns about air quality to cloud my judgment. I acted inappropriately and abused my position. I am sorry for the stress and expense I caused, and I accept responsibility for my actions." It sounded rehearsed, but at least it was something. The judge accepted the plea, imposed the sentence, and that was it. Patricia walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer, not making eye contact with anyone. In the parking lot afterward, Lisa Brennan shook my hand. "Well, that is as good an outcome as we could hope for. She is on record admitting wrongdoing, she has been removed from power, and you have legal protection from future harassment." "How do you feel?" "Tired," I said honestly, "but relieved. I just want to move on." "That is understandable. Let me know if she violates the restraining order or if there are any other issues. Otherwise, I think this chapter is closed. Spring came to southern Oregon with an explosion of wildflowers and warming temperatures. I stopped needing the wood stove as March turned into April. The neighborhood seemed lighter somehow, less tense. George Whitmore was elected to serve out Patricia's term as board president, and he ran things with a much lighter touch, focusing on actual community needs instead of petty enforcement. I started to relax, to feel like my house was actually my home instead of a battleground. In May, I was working in my front yard, planting some native shrubs to improve the landscaping when a car pulled up. For a second my heart jumped, old anxiety flaring, but then I saw it was just Frank Morrison from next door. "Hey Samuel, looking good. Those are nice plants. Thanks. Trying to make the place look less bare. Listen, a few of us are having a barbecue on Saturday, just neighbors, nothing fancy. You should come. Bring a side dish or something. I would like that." The barbecue was at Michelle Torres's house, her backyard full of people and kids and dogs running around. It felt normal and warm, the kind of community gathering I had hoped for when I moved to Whispering Pines. People introduced themselves, shared food, complained about work and spouses and teenager drama. No one mentioned the HOA or Patricia or any of the drama from the winter. It felt like a line had been drawn, a collective decision to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. George Whitmore cornered me by the grill at one point, spatula in hand. "How are you doing, Samuel? Really?" "Better. It was rough for a while, but I am okay." "Good, and thank you again. You could have just paid the fine and moved on, let it go. Instead you stood up, and that changed things around here. It mattered." "I was just defending my right to heat my house." "It was more than that. You reminded everyone that the HOA is supposed to work for us, not the other way around. That matters." As the sun set and the party wound down, I sat in a lawn chair with a beer, watching fireflies start to appear in the growing darkness. I thought about the past 6 months, about how a simple fine had spiraled into stalking and criminal charges, and a neighborhood reckoning. It had been exhausting and stressful and expensive, but I had won. Not just the legal case, but the larger principle. My home was my own. The HOA had rules, sure, and those rules had their place. But they could not be weaponized by petty tyrants to push personal agendas and harass people who were not doing anything wrong. That mattered. George was right about that. I finished my beer and said my goodbyes, walking the short distance back to my house. Inside, I could see my wood stove through the window, dark and dormant for the season but ready for next winter. I would use it again when the cold came back, without fear or hesitation, because it was mine in my house, in a country where property rights and due process meant something. Patricia Hendrickson had tried to take that away, hiding behind HOA authority and anonymous complaints. But the system had worked eventually. Slowly, frustratingly, expensively, but it had worked. I had documentation and evidence and witnesses and an inspector's report. I had followed the rules, kept careful records, and stood my ground when it would have been easier to give in. And in the end, that had been enough. Over the following months, life in Whispering Pines settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board, led by George, took a much more reasonable approach to governance. They focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and addressing legitimate safety concerns. The arbitrary enforcement and petty violations that had characterized Patricia's reign disappeared. I became more involved in the community, attending board meetings occasionally, and joining a neighborhood watch group that Frank Morrison organized. It felt good to be part of something positive instead of being constantly on the defensive. In July, I ran into Patricia at the grocery store in Medford. We were both in the produce section, and there was no way to avoid each other. She looked at me, and I saw something in her expression I had not expected: shame. "Samuel," she said quietly, "Patricia, I want you to know that my apology in court was genuine. I did not handle things appropriately. I let my personal feelings override my judgment, and I hurt you and others in the process. I am sorry." I studied her for a moment. She looked older, tired, less certain of herself. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I appreciate it. I am glad you stood up to me." I needed to be stopped, even if I could not see it at the time. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, then she nodded and walked away, pushing her cart toward the bakery section. I watched her go, feeling something release in my chest. Closure, maybe, or just the final letting go of anger I had been carrying. The leaves started to turn in September, painting the hills around Whispering Pines in shades of gold and crimson. The air took on that crisp edge that signaled autumn's approach. I ordered another cord of wood, this time a mix of oak and maple, and had it delivered and stacked in my side yard. When the first truly cold night arrived in October, I built a fire in my wood stove without hesitation. The familiar ritual of arranging kindling, lighting the paper, watching the flames catch and grow. The warmth spreading through my living room, the dancing light behind the glass door. I stood there watching it burn, remembering all the stress and conflict this simple act had caused. But that was over now. This was just a fire, heating my home on a cold night exactly as it was meant to do. The smoke rising from my chimney was minimal, just wispy traces of gray against the darkening sky. Clean burning, EPA-certified, properly installed and maintained. Legal and appropriate in every way. I poured myself a bourbon and settled into my favorite chair, the heat from the stove washing over me. Outside, the first stars were appearing. Inside, I was home, truly home, in a way I had not felt since moving to Whispering Pines. The HOA had tested me, Patricia had targeted me, and the system had ground slowly through its processes. But I had stood my ground, documented everything, followed the rules, and demanded that others do the same. That right, that simple right to use my legal heating appliance without harassment, had been worth fighting for. Not just for me, but for everyone who came after. Every homeowner who might face a board member who forgot that authority comes with responsibility and limits. The wood popped in the stove, sending up a small shower of sparks. I sipped my bourbon and felt finally, completely at peace. This was my home. My wood stove. My warmth on a cold night, and no one could take that away.